I want to talk with you about the urban scale, and I don't want to talk with you about building. Because I think this is a problem when we're talking about the urban scale, that everybody thinks that he immediately has to start planning buildings. I just give you an insight what is going on in Munich at the Technical University. Then let's say I want to present my idea of sustainability in the field of urbanism. And then I will just show you some, and then I will just show you some projects of my students, and hopefully we can discuss about it. I said it's a quite large faculty, so we have 28 professors with a staff of 150, more or less, then 1,800 students, and our main business is actually the Bachelor of Architecture and the Master of Architecture. The faculty is organized in 4 specialization fields, which is actually architecture, design, and society. So this is the core of the faculty, and then there are 3 groups overlapping actually, which working in several directions, like cultural heritage, so this is more the theory part, integrated building technologies, and then urban and landscape transformation. And what you see down here is only the part urban and landscape transformation, and you see it's already 8 professors, 3 of them in the field of urban design, and then with the different specializations in planning, housing, and myself in sustainable urbanism. 3 landscape architects, a regional economist, 1 guy coming from real estate, and then Ignacio Farias in urban sociology. Actually, we are teaching in all of these different master programs. So urbanism and sustainability is a question in all of these curricula. Together with TU Delft and ETH Zurich, we did a large study on European airport systems, and we found out that it's, for example, key for integrating a new energy system here in the region of Frankfurt, whether the heat and cold plan of the airport of Frankfurt is located outside the fence or inside the fence of the airport. Why? Theoretically, you can build an integrated system using this heat and cold plant. But the problem is, as soon as it is inside of the plant, the airport is actually legally the provider of the energy. And then a lot of things start. For example, the airport has to guarantee for the quality of the water, the quality of the heat, etc., and then it will never happen. So maybe the most important decision to make before even thinking about the system is not to decide for a very elaborated technology where we can make another 1.5% of energy, but to decide whether the plant is located outside or inside the fence. And this is an urban design decision. Indeed, in Germany, you have a law for this, you have a regulation for this. This is the systems or how the Bavarian state actually understands sustainable development. I just translated it for you to make it a little bit more accessible. It remains a little bit obscure, but this is not because you do not know the vocabulary, but this is because of this factor here. The Bavarian state actually states that sustainable development is a function between competitiveness, so economic factors, quality of life, this is the social factor, ecology, and the liquidity of public funds. So if there is no money in the state, there is no sustainable development. And you said that before, there's tons of money. I think this is blunt nonsense. A sustainable system is something which also should run if the state is broke. So let's design these cities. But why is the state saying so? Because they only can make their projects in the public realm. So, for example, this is a city regeneration project done by my predecessor at the chair of urban design in 1987. And you can see that he's only talking about the public space and the qualification of the public space. If today, in 2016, we're looking at the same system, seeing the problems, then we know that we, for example, have to deal with old agricultural buildings given up, with private, let's say, shops, which are not working as they should. So there is no money in the system on the private side to invest into sustainability in the regeneration of the system. And then we start sketching, and then you immediately find out that the project plan looks completely different. You have to come up with completely different ideas than the ones which the state is actually following. Well, this is something the company Metron planners from Bruck in the canton of Agovia told us some years ago when they speculated about re-densification of single-family house estates, because they said, forget about everything you learned before about urban planning. If you have to deal with an already existing urban fabric, the story changes dramatically. And this is actually my ambition, to teach the students how to cope with these situations. The only thing you can do about it is really going there and being very specific. So this is why we also invented an educational format which is called Urban Lab, or Entwurfslabor in Germany, where we're typically getting some money from the state or the community we're working in, and then really going there, working with the people, making surveys, discussing with the politicians. This is always a very, very interesting experience for the student to discuss, for example, here with the president of the region. But the projects are really great which are coming out, because they are all committed to at least 5 fundamental principles. So 2 minutes of theory now. I think sustainability means that we're talking about a system which is able to regenerate itself. So this is where the idea comes from. So a sustainable development strategy or plan describes a mode of reproduction and management of a system. It also says something about the long-term development of it, and this is why it's calling for an intergenerational strategy, and it is a pact for dynamic qualities. So we're not just making our numbers fitting the certification system, but this is actually a quality which lasts over the time and develops over the time. The sustainable development strategy also provides elasticity to the system. So the plan actually makes the city more resilient because it can react to unforeseen things. And then, fourth, the sustainable development strategy or plan is based on integrative and participatory process, at least in a democratic environment, which in the specific context sets norms, goals, and bind actors to the plan. I'm not only saying this because of, let's say, a general democratic idea, but I'm also saying this because you have to ask the people to participate in the process. Do you have an idea what the ratio between public and private investment in the city is? The private investment in the city is 9 times bigger in Middle and Central Europe than the public money in the system. So if you can move the private sector, you have 9 times more impact. You might ask, where are the architects or designers in this? I think, and this is my 5th principle, I think sustainable development strategy plans calls for design solutions, new design solutions, because up to now, we never thought about regenerative systems. We did not design them. So maybe we have to come up with all new ideas about the urban realm. How much time do I have left? 10 minutes? Okay. So within the next 10, 15 minutes, so I'm already saying that I'm exceeding the time by 5 minutes, I want to show you some 5 examples of students' projects of these urban laboratories. And we're based in Munich, and this is the state of Bavaria. It's almost twice the size of Switzerland, but actually we're the only university dealing with urban design and sustainability. So we have projects all over the country within the last 6 years, and some international projects too. The ones which are marked with a line here are the ones I'm showing here. The green ones are ones which I did with my students. The red ones are typical research studios. The purple ones are the ones which now unfold their own life. So they are built, they are accepted as a kind of legal plan or legal strategy for the development of the city. And not only in smaller towns like Wallersdorf or Monheim, places of 2,000 to 10,000 inhabitants, but also of the city of Nuremberg, a city of 550,000 inhabitants. And this is what students can move. The first project in Wallersdorf, I already showed you. So let's go for the second one. This is a very interesting one. When thinking about let's go for sustainability on the city scale, the cities very often talk about revitalizing old programs. Like, for example, if the retail starts to come into crisis, they reinvent actually the retail in the city, which is maybe the wrong strategy. And this is what this master project is on. Denise Erhardt, she really looked into the shifts of retail and industry between two cities neighboring each other, both in a structurally really problematic situation. But here, for example, she identified really this cannibalism by really looking into the detail of all these processes. And from there on, she could identify areas in the city which might have a problem in the future. Then she focused on the city of Lauingen. This is an architect's work when starting with an urban design. And she found out that there are more than 80 empty buildings in the city, mostly former retail buildings with some flats on the top of it, but not used because the owners still wait for the retail to come back to Lauingen, which will not happen. So this is an analytical work, and she proposed a project how to revitalize the city with new program. She made a design, a very decent design. So this is all a very regular project. But there's one thing she invented, which is really fantastic. She said, if there are 80 buildings, we never ever have the capacity to work on all of these 80 buildings and to be specific. But maybe we can make life for the owners of the buildings a little bit easier if we give them their first initial ideas. And she found out that there is a typology of buildings, so there are only 3 or 4 different types of buildings in 4 or 3 different types of locations. And if you combine them, you have a relatively simple matrix, which at least gives the owner of the building, in the moment still dreaming of retail, other ideas, initial ideas. And if they then start to involve themselves into the renewal process of the city, then we can make a more specific project. So this is, for example, something which comes out of such a student's project if you really consider the systematics of regeneration process in the city. In the urban lab in Tettau, in the north of Franconia, a region which is demographically shrinking, we also found out that there are flats missing, and we wrote that in a plan, and the next day the papers were full of it and said, oh, these stupid professors from Munich, we're in a shrinking area and they want to build houses. But when looking in the systematics, this is the city of Tettau, and you can see 3 different colors indicating 3 different types of projects. The green ones, what we're always doing, refurbishing the urban and public space. The blue one, which is already something very new, thinking about value creation chains. And we found out that in Tettau, they're not using their potential, their capacities, their knowledge, even the resources growing in the forest. So they have the largest forest in Bavaria, and they're not using wood for construction. But the crazy thing is, they only can use this resource if there are people who want to work in these industries. And for these people, you need houses, because 98% of all the houses in Tettau are single-family houses. And just think about yourself. Your first flat, is this a single-family house? No, it's not. So you never go to Tettau because there is no rental flats. The problem with Tettau is also that 30% of the single-family houses are empty, but buying one of them is really an economically stupid action, because in the end you're investing into this house and the value of the house in the market is still nil. So what we did actually is identifying some of the houses and saying, wow, this is, for example, something which can be qualified very easily. You also can transform the old industrial buildings, but this is a little bit more tricky. But there are some houses which easily can be transformed, and then we went on with a survey and asked the people, would you live there if there are actually the flats available on the market? And we asked our colleague, Florian Nagler, who holds a chair in architecture and construction, to come up with the most simple reconstruction project of this house. And indeed, it was named Model Project of the Federation, and it's now going to be built, and all the flats are rented out. So economically, it's a very successful model, completely unexpected, and nobody would ever have developed this. Only the students did, because they combined the finding that a sixth of the people is not leaving these shrinking regions because of work, but because of the missing flats. And the really relatively strange market here, and on the other hand, the job opportunities in the region. And by combining this with a systematic approach, you can come up with regeneration ideas. The most critical part is actually to communicate this to the people. And this is something that architects also, I think, need as a skill, to explain themselves, and not in this strange language, we could call it architects' English, with all these fancy words, but in really proper, simple words. Why? This is a tiny little town in the north of Switzerland, in the canton of Schaffhouse. And there's a strange thing about this historic town. All the people are leaving this town, and they're moving here. So they have a suburbanization effect, which is really stupid, because here is heavy investment into infrastructure, etc., etc. You're consuming a lot of land, and you ask yourself, why are they not staying here? When looking at the building structure a little bit closer, you understand this has something to do with, for example, the lighting situation, this very large volumetry of these buildings. And we started actually from coming up with an idea to use the inner darker spaces of these old buildings as energy storage, so that we can make the whole energy system a little bit more sufficient. That was easy to communicate. It was also relatively easy to communicate that in this cramped situation, maybe we have to cut out some of the buildings to make living situation better. And it was also relatively easy to ask the people to invent a new governance system for the quality. What was the most tricky project there? It was that one, because they thought that the quality of the old town will be raised if you close the main road for cars and making a pedestrian zone. And this is really stupid, because just looking at the plan for a second again, this is this road. I mean, the houses are really standing with one facade at one road and with the next facade at the next road. So if you want to give the people a little bit of a private outside space, you have to do it in these side roads. And so the middle road is the one where you have to park all the cars. By then making drivers pedestrians, they also walk along the old shopping facades, and maybe there's one little retail or a bar or a meeting place which then has a chance to survive. But convincing the people that in this particular specific situation, maybe the car can save the survival of the city was very tricky, because they all read from the papers on green sustainable development is the car is bad. And so this is what we did, actually, creating a newspaper really explaining how it works. In the end, actually, we managed the project. This leads me to my last project, the Nuremberg Weststadt Urban Lab. It's a larger one, where all these factors I presented now meet. It was actually a project on the initialized by the state's building agency of Bavaria. They dreamt of Mazda. They said, hey, why are these guys in the UAE able to build such a sustainable city, and you are not? Please, dear professors at TU Munich, come up with the idea for the Nuremberg West area. This is 10 square kilometers, 33,000 inhabitants. And I was so annoyed by this reading that this is a sustainable city, because technically maybe it is, but it's a city without inhabitants. The situation only is tricky if you have inhabitants and you have to respect their own ideas about developing the city. If you have a desert and you can build a structure, this is all about technology, but not about economics and social aspects, like maybe Muk presented in the lecture before. So we took actually the money of the state, $1 million or something like that, and made our project. And the project was about really projecting into the far future to help us to make short-term decisions, because in the moment, all the plans are only looking 5 to 10 years into the future. And then, for example, the the progress in technology is the limiting factor. But if we're talking about a vision of 50 years, you can imagine much more. So we projected in the future, and this we did with 6 different chairs, and in a lot of workshops and fighting, etc., etc. And we ended up in this plan here, which is not a master plan for the redevelopment, but which is just showing the 8 or 7 fundamental principles, how the city of Nuremberg should develop the area and what are the things to look at. You see, this is not really, let's say, sustainability talking. This is really just basic principles of urban design. In the future, you might have problems if you develop the city as islands, as, for example, modernism did. How did we do that? The first step was really to design desirable futures and then to question the desirable futures towards their effect on sustainability indicators, like, for example, energy consumption, land consumption, etc., etc. And it is possible then to at least identify a certain tendency of development. So, for example, we know that, for example, in all 3 different desirable futures, and the first one is more or less stagnation, managed care. The second one is the boom, and the third one is actually a shrinking situation. We need more houses. So we can start building houses since we know that we will need them in the future. So I cannot tell how many houses we need. This is just a very rough assumption, but this helps us to make the right decisions. And we were very lucky with that, because we also found out that the knowledge economy hub has very different requirements than, for example, the managed care scenario. So we also could make a transformation plan for all the 3 of the desired futures and indicating the different areas, which then leads to a map like this, which is just showing these maybe are the hotspots of future development to look at. This is already more than we had before. Then maybe there are some initial projects which can be identified, and then this is actually the master plan. We showed where these projects could happen. So, for example, projects on pedestrianization of the city, which roads are the one where we have to do something? Sponge parks, which are the areas where we can work with the sponge park system? And this we gave to the city of Nuremberg, and they integrated that in the plan. And they were very happy because we explained them why is it relevant and how does it work and how does it look like, by just showing some references and maybe also showing the interaction between the different projects. So that's it, one could say, but we said no. If you as a city decide for that, the owners of the houses still are not convinced. So what we also have to do is to explain the owners how it works and how they can contribute to the sustainable development of the city. So we explained them, for example, how the sponge park idea works, which also qualifies the wastewater system of the city, then the social quality in these areas because of new green space, and also the ecological quality of the area. So we explained it to them, and then we invented this, a kind of network diagram showing this is relevant because of. So we are really explaining the processes, and while politicians always say, hey, you have to reduce everything to very, very small lines, very easy lines, we found out that the people are very interested in this. They just want to understand it and nobody explaining it. And then they think, for example, that a green tower in Milan, which is a beautiful tower with trees on the balconies, is the most sustainable building in the world. It is not. But this is the images we're selling in the moment. And as architects, we really have to be serious about our goals and to explain how does sustainability work in the city, what is actually the things which we have to plan or we have to fix, in this case in the infrastructure of Nuremberg, and how could it look like in the future. So here we are just making 5, 6 different designs and showing how this could look. Maybe it looks like this, and maybe you live here, and then you can imagine how nice it would be, for example, to have this park. And this is something only architects can do, and not engineers in energy management or something like that. So it is our job, and we just have to take it, and then we can convince these people really to come with us and to make the city more sustainable. So, and after this presentation, I hope it was not too long. I think now we can talk about design and buildings. But we have to integrate all these ideas before really saying, and this is the right project in the right spot. And I hope that we can have a discussion about that a little later. Thank you for your attention.